My name is Lúcia Nagib. I'm professor of film in the Department of Film, Theatre and Television at the University of Reading. And the event we are opening up now is titled Intermedia, Interarts, China and the UK in Focus. This has been for us the opportunity to bring together, in a general celebration, interconnected research strands, long-standing colleagues and friends, an internationally renowned array of practitioners, all the while straightening the ties between two countries, China and the UK, at a time of rising divisions and isolationist trends around the world. This event is in the first place tributary to a major project, now coming to its conclusion, which is entitled Intermedia project, which has been funded by the HRC in the UK and FAPESP in Brazil, and which studies the application of intermediality as a historiographic method. We were very lucky to have had Dr. Tamara here as a postdoctoral research on the project, which has prompted her to start thinking about and building upon the intermedial method as applied to Chinese cinema. Chinese cinema is her theme, is what she has studied in her thesis, her wonderful PhD thesis, which I hope will soon be published. And I know she's working on the several chapters to get them out and about to us very soon. Parallel to that, I was lucky to be able to ensure the University of Reading's participation within the UK-China Humanities Alliance, an initiative originated in China and involving Tsinghua University, Peking University, Fudan University, Wuhan University, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong on the Chinese side, and the University of Exeter, King's College London, University of Manchester, University of Oxford, University of Warwick, SOAS, and the University of Reading on the UK side. The British Council was also involved in the initiative and offered funding to support events on behalf of the Alliance, so as to foster impactful research exchange between China and the UK. This workshop is one of those events benefiting from the BC funding. Another auspicious development was the participation of Tamara and myself in a conference of the International Society for Intermediate Studies held at Hangzhou University in November 2018, organized by Professor Rong, who is here with us today. These led us to discover how the intermediate method was gaining traction in China and opened up a wealth of exciting possibilities of furthering a dialogue and partnerships focusing on intermediate and interarts approaches. We are also delighted and grateful that such an array of outstanding representatives in research and practice in Chinese subjects were able to join us in this event. Tamara will be making a more detailed introduction of our guests, but I would like to give special thanks to Cecilia Mello, where is she? Who gave us invaluable support by activating her own insiders network to contact some of our guests today. It's such a fortunate coincidence that her pioneering book on Zhezhongke, let me show you the cover of her book, which is titled The Cinema of Zhezhongke, Realism and Memory in Chinese Film, has just come out with Bloomsbury. And you may have seen that it's available for you to purchase downstairs in the lobby. I encourage all of you to buy or order this book during our lunch break. And please make sure you read it, because a substantial part of it is devoted to the study of intermediality within the work of someone who's recognized as one of the greatest filmmakers in the world. Before I close these introductory remarks, I would like to thank the University of Reading and the Department of Film, Theatre and Television for their help with this event, offering administrative and technical support and allowing us to use this wonderful Mingala building for free. Finally, our thanks go to the British Council, which funded this event in its integrity, and the UK-China Humanities Alliance, which made all of this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lúcia, for such a thorough introduction as always. So, let's get down to business for today. We have gathered here with scholars from mainland China, from Hong Kong, from the UK, to foster a cross-cultural and interdisciplinary dialogue on film, literature, painting, television. Have I forgotten something else? Cinema in China. All of these are brought together through the themes of interarts and intermedia. And the project draws on the assumption that intermedia and interarts, which are border crossing by definition, can be instrumental in understanding complex developments in the Sinosphere and its increasing encroachment into the wider world, as Lúcia was saying, including the UK, which is currently under its own set of pressures to react from the wider sphere to a more marked national context. My co-organizer, Professor Nagib, and I believe that border crossings in intermedia and interarts are ideally positioned to evaluate these social and cultural practices involving the local and global. So, some of the questions we hope to raise today include how can a cross-cultural and interdisciplinary dialogue on intermedia and interarts in China help us to better understand their discursive and creative practices across geographical, cultural, political, and aesthetic borders. What role does intermedia or interarts play in the understanding of historical and cultural transformations? And how is an increasingly globalized system of mediated communication impacting on the humanities as a whole? So the panels today are constructed with these intermedia, interarts concepts and key questions in mind as we discuss those various disciplines. We have Rong speaking on the calligraphy and Chinese painting. We have Yunwen speaking on online literature and adaptation. Simone Knox will be taking us from the US all the way back to China with her understanding of the adaptation of Friends, if everybody's familiar with that television sitcom. I will be speaking on intermediality in Chinese independent film, specifically documentary film Though I Am Gone. Cecilia will be speaking about Jia Zhenke and intermediality, Jia Zhenke being one of the foremost Chinese independent filmmakers of our time. And have I forgotten anybody else? We also have Stephanie Donald. She will be discussing a very fascinating topic, cultural posters of the PRC. And she's brought quite a lot of material with her as well, so that should be an interesting discussion. And we also have today two filmmakers, Zheng Mengqi of the Qiaotengdi workstation, formerly based in Beijing, now somewhere in a village north of Beijing, and Wu Wenguang, the pioneer documentary filmmaker in China. He was known as the godfather to many of independent documentary filmmaking in China. And they will be together delivering a lecture performance on the Folk Memory Project. And then later on, we'll move to the cinema, which is across from us, actually down the stairs and through the door, but across from us actually physically, to watch two of their film screenings, which is in your program here. We've got Self-Portrait, Sphinx in 47 Kilometers, and Investigating My Father, two of their most recent films. So I think we'll start now with our first speaker. Lúcia, she's chairing the panel, so would you like to introduce our first speaker? And we'll get going. Thank you.
I believe we have 20 minutes for each speaker.
25.
Yeah. 25 maximum, so I'll be controlling my watch here for time. And then I hope we have some time for discussion. So I think all presentations will be done in a row, and then discussion will be reserved for the end of the panel. And I'm very pleased to introduce the first speaker, Professor Rong, who is Professor of English and Dean of the School of International Studies at Hangzhou Normal University in China. She graduated from Shanghai International Studies University in 2007 with a doctorate degree of English language and literature. She has been a visiting scholar at the University of Cambridge and UC Berkeley. Her scholarly interest focuses on modern and contemporary English literature, East-West literary relations, and interarts studies. Her most recent collaborated books are Ezra Pound, Among Chinese Talents, and Le Fleur du Mal, Urban Writing in Anglo-American Modernist Poetry. Professor O will give today a talk on traditional Chinese painting, an intermediate play of sister arts.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be invited by Lúcia to attend this workshop. I'm from Hangzhou, a very beautiful city in China, and also many thanks to Tamara for her constantly online help to make this trip possible. The presentation that I will give today on traditional Chinese painting and intermediate play of sister arts. We know that traditional Chinese painting rarely is a pure painting, but a collaborative art with a dynamic intermediate play among painting, poetry, calligraphy, and seal in one scroll, with a case study of Tang Yin's Lady Ban. It's an abstract. With a case study of Tang Yin's Lady Ban Holy Fan, Wenzen means orchid and bamboo, and a few other works if I have time. The paper explores the complex relationship of different media in the traditional Chinese painting. On the one hand, there's a strong collaboration among different agents. Very often, after a painter finishes his or her share of work, a poet, who may be his or her friend, writes after the painter finishes. A poet, who may be his or her friend, patron, or customer, composes an aphoristic poem for the painting. Then a calligrapher writes the poem on the painting, and the artwork is not completed until the seal, or seals sometimes, stamped on the painting. The aphoristic poem helps to provide the background information of the painting, to highlight what is depicted, to reveal the intention of the painter, to make a comment on the painting, and or to extend the poet's emotion inspired or epitomized by the painting. Nevertheless, when there are different operators, there is subtle rivalry among them. The painter dominates the scroll, sparing limited space for other actors, while the poet intends to go further through the verbal depiction of what is visual and the nuisance of what is not. The calligrapher completes with the ink brush the same medium as the painters, and the seal engraver strives to be independent with a strikingly red pattern on the ink scroll, all of which provide clues what roles the different media play in the performance and the participation of this art, best illustrated in Wenzen means orchid and the bamboo. So the outline of my presentation is three parts. Firstly, traditional Chinese painting. I would like to have a retrospect on the history, the development of traditional Chinese painting, a work of sister arts. And secondly, I will introduce a genius of 3 or 4 perfections, Tang Yin, with his painting to illustrate the integration of sister arts in one classical Chinese painting. And thirdly, I would like to make use of Wen Zhenming's painting to illustrate dynamic interaction and silent rivalry of sister arts in one scroll. First part, a traditional Chinese painting, a work of sister arts. The term the three perfections, Sanjue, was coined during the 8th century in praise of town poet Zheng Qian, who excelled in poetry, calligraphy, and painting. The term simply denotes an artist's ability in three art forms. However, it does not clarify the relationships between them, and the term of three perfections overlooked the importance of seal in the Chinese painting. As a matter of fact, classic Chinese painting is rarely a pure painting. Poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal, or the four perfections, have been practiced together in the single works of art. Many of the artists were deeply influenced by the aesthetics of literature and drew upon China's rich tradition of verbal imagery in creating their paintings. Through masterful calligraphy, vivid depictions of historical narrative, and subtle images containing personal allusions, the classic Chinese painting illustrates the affinities that paintings shares with calligraphy and poetry, most evidently visually in the supple brush line that gives formal expression to all, and the stamping of a proper seal or seals can give a final touch to the work of art. The relationship between words and images in Chinese art developed from one of the complementary illustration to one of complex integration. The pictorial nature of Chinese written characters, possibly its most outstanding feature when compared with the phonetic transcriptions of Western languages, finds inherent affinities between writing and painting. The saying, calligraphy and painting have the same source, in Chinese, 书画同源, is often cited as evidence that the two arts are closely related. The brush, the instrument of a calligrapher, is also used by the painter, and the results produced by the use of dots and strokes are similar. Writing brush, ink stick, stick slab, and paper are known as the scholar's four jewels or the four treasures of study. Together with seal, there are common daily companions to traditional educated Chinese. For the Song dynasty, however, there were few paintings with inscriptions on them except for the painter's autograph at an inconspicuous corner. When certain qualities of ideographic writing system were conjoined with larger intellectual and aesthetic developments in China during the late Song and early Yuan dynasties, that is in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the pictorial nature of Chinese painting did evolve into an influential factor and helped to shape the aesthetics of calligraphy and painting, and the characters were not used simply as the unavoidable media, but were also made use of as symbolic systems. Likewise, after the development of realistic representation in painting reached its full flowering during the late Song dynasty, early Yuan painters turned increasingly to symbolism, when eventually the image became overladen with symbolic meaning. It could no longer be expressed with the help of language. Painting, by its nature, has limitations. An unidentified portrait does not tell the viewer who is depicted. An unidentified landscape does not tell the viewer where the scene is located. In these cases, information to supplement the painting is needed. One way of supplying such information might be attach a note to the painting, but a note could identify only the person, place, or type of subject that is depicted. It could not convey the artist's feelings about the subject. So, inscribing a few words or a poem on the painting could serve to clarify what the painter, viewer, or poet has in mind. A large space in traditional chess painting, since Song Dynasty physically leave the room to proper ekphrastic poems, and red seals function much aesthetically in ink paintings as well. With the rise of landscape painting and literati painting, more and more talented artists with 3 perfections or even 4 perfections turned up and practiced the intermediate play of 6 arts in their works. Poetry and painting both serve the same master, the man of letters. Poets, immersed in the beauty of scenery, transformed visual observations into pure and polished phrases, while painters transformed inspiring poems into pictures. Thus, the aspects of poetry and painting are inextricably connected. It was Shu Shi, the leading scholar artist of late Northern Song Dynasty, first advanced that there is poetry in painting and painting in poetry, and one of the earliest to put down the poem and painting on the same scroll. The seals became more functional aesthetically also in Song Dynasty, not as a supplement to the artist's signature, but as a part of the painting with its unique combination of white and red, where ink painting became the norm of the art. By brushing in a poem and stamping a seal or seals on the painting, and thus using both word and image, the artist created a verbal discourse and a broader context in which to express himself or herself. Now let's look at genus of 3 or 4 perfections to illustrate the integration of sister arts in one work of art. In a work of 4 perfections, the ekphrastic poem helps to provide the background information of the painting, to highlight what is depicted, to reveal the intention of the painter, to make a comment on the painting, etc. So now I would like to make use of painting by Tang Ying. Tang Ying is one of the rare geniuses who was gifted as poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal engraving. He was known as one of the 4 painters of Wu school in Ming Dynasty. He was a prodigy and ambitious for a successful political career at an early age, but the notorious examination scandal of 1499 ruined his prospect for official career, as he was accused of cheating in the official exams. Disillusioned with politics, Tang Ying traveled a lot, devoted himself to the art, and made a living as a professional artist, excelling at painting of figures, flowers, birds, and landscape. Meanwhile, he cultivated himself as an upright and haughty figure, immersed himself in drinking and sensual comforts. He had a quite close relationship with a prostitute in his time. He once summarized his life as 15 years of dancing and singing, sleeping in ladies and drinks, thus coloring his work with bitterness and playfulness. Now, let's share his. Okay. So Lady Ban holding a fan is Tang Ying's masterpiece of figure, in which a graceful lady stands to one side in a court, holding a fan in her hands. There is melancholy between her eyebrows. The long tassels of the fan flow down and flutter away with the edge of the lady's gown in the autumn wind. Rocks and bamboos in contrast, white and black beside her heighten the ambience of gloom and loneliness. The whole ink painting is not monotonous owing to Tang's excellent variation of large and thin lines as well as heavy and light strokes. Red seals in different parts with the painter's different stylistic signatures not only add a few bright touches to the black-white ink painting, but also make the structure of the painting well balanced. The two tail seals is the tail seal and head seal and the mid seal. The two head seals, one smaller, name seal, functioning as a confirmation of the painter's signature, one big leisurely seal to end the inscription and keep two lines balanced. The head seal is used to counterbalance the heavy tail seals. The middle seal alongside the head seal vertically and alongside the head of the lady horizontally with a red image between black words and black hair of the lady, two red seals on the lower right to counterbalance the dark of the rocks. The seals on the lower left are left by the successive collectors of the painting. On the left top of the painting is the painter's self-inscription. So the poem on the painting. Silk fans are to be put aside in autumn, for what the lady is so graving. Meditate on the autumn human world. Who can escape the thickness of the fate? There is allusion in the painting and the poem. Lady Ban was one of the concubines of Cheng Emperor of Han Dynasty, a very talented woman. She is known from the illustration of Gu Kaizhi of admonitions to the palace ladies. The painting is stored in British Museum. Oh, I wonder if that's okay. In this painting, she refuses the emperor's invitation to ride with him in the car for fear of distracting him from state affairs. So he was a model for the virtuous lady in royal family. But later on, she lost the favor of the emperor. She composed a 5-chapter poem likening her situation to that of the fan. She signs with a forlorn plaint, just like in the fan, so appreciated in the warmth of summer, only to be cast aside in the chill of the autumn. So since then, the phrase of autumn fan is often alluded to a lovelorn beauty. In Lady Ban's poem, the poetess compares herself as a fan. In Tang Yin's poem, the poet compares himself as an abandoned lady and counsels himself to see through the vicissitudes of life. As a central figure, the lady in the painting performs her life story in front of us. The painter, as well as the poet, participates in the performance through inscription by playing himself as the lady. The message embodied in the inscription is highlighted by the painter's 3 leisurely seals. There are 3 leisurely seals. Read like far from the mending word. The middle seal, spot of epiphany, combined with the tail seal, number 1 in the fierce imperial examinations, when sometimes getting lost in the company of girls. So all these seals help to suggest the painter's Taoist as well as a cynical attitude towards the thickness of fate, thus constituting a dynamic and perfect interaction and integration of painting, poetry, calligraphy, and seals. So as time is limited, I go to third part. Dynamic interaction and silent rivalry of sister arts in one scroll with different operators. Qigong, in his paper, a very famous Chinese artist, argues that only those works that combine the artist's own poetry, calligraphy, and painting attain the highest form of artistic expression. It is not always the case. A work of art with different operators can tell us more intricate and dynamic interplay between sister arts and contribute more to the interarts poetics. In Chinese culture, the plum blossom, the orchid, the bamboo, and the chrysanthemum are known as the four figures of moral integrity. The plum blossom relates to the strength in adversity, the orchid to the noble purity, the bamboo to the uprightness, and the chrysanthemum to faithfulness. So Chinese artists tend to draw on the four figures to inspire themselves. In Orchids and Bamboo by Wen Zhenming, the painter presents us a thicket of orchids mixed with a branch of bamboo growing out of rocks, which indicates the poet's perseverance of moral purity and uprightness in an adverse environment. On the right upper hand is a painter's self-inscription in running script. It's the painter's own poem. It reads like, "The bamboo is a fairy god immersed in wind and moonlight. The orchid is a fairy lady in delicacy and grace. To keep the springtime always in sight is to draw the essence of the view with the residue ink." The inscription reveals the poet's identification with the noble characters of the bamboo and the orchid, and his belief in the immortality of the art. After the signature of Wen Zhenming are the artist's name seal, the seal for Wen Zhenming, and his residence seal, seal of enlightenment chamber. So from the seals, also we can find the painter's personality. In the middle is an inscription in standard script by Cai Yu, his contemporary artist and scholar. In the middle, the inscription reads like, "The orchid is in the secluded dell and matches with upright bamboo. One feels freed from the care at the view. A refreshing breeze blows the ink slab." So the first two lines of the poem comments on the prominent images of orchid and bamboo, and last two lines extend the poet's emotion inspired by the sight of the painting. After signature of the poet calligrapher, a seal of his stylistic name, a Daoist. Then on the left upper hand is the inscription in running script by Emperor Qianlong. He is a talented emperor of Qing dynasty, written 2 centuries later. So poem reads like, "Voluminous blossoms and sparse leaves all stand up beyond earthly concerns, seeking friends in my leisure, who can agree with me in pleasure." The first red seal goes, "A man of leisure." We have 2 seals here. The first goes, "A man of leisure," and the second one goes, "A man of taste." So the inscription reveals the emperor's envy of the noble plants, far from the demanding crowd, and his discontent of no matching company because of his high positions. Different poems reveal different responses of viewers to the same painting, as well as their different life philosophies and outlooks on the world. They also constitute dynamic interactions and dialogues among different artists across the time and space. As time limited, I only show you, okay, the conclusion now. So in China, although it is common knowledge that Chinese poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal, known as the perfections, have been practiced together in a single works of art, the precise relationship between them has yet to be fully explored. The broad interarts approaches in the paper suggest further directions for the study of Chinese art. In China, where the conceptual unity between poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal derived from a holistic view of culture, the tension between word and image, characteristic of the West, exists less prominent. Chinese artworks, as products of different value and thought system, invite Westerners to think about them in new ways. The richness and complexity for perfections in traditional Chinese painting will enrich the international interarts and intermediate studies. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Rong, for this fascinating talk about the four perfections. It's so thought-provoking, and I hope we will have time to discuss this in further depth at the end of the presentations. In the meantime, I would like to introduce Dr. Yunwen Gao, who's Assistant Professor of the Center for Chinese Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where she teaches courses on Chinese literature and research methods. Her research interests include modern Chinese literature and culture, Sinophone studies, oral tradition, and dialect literature. She is currently working on her book project titled Language, Soundscape, and Identity Formation in 20th Century China. And her paper today is titled Storytelling and Map Making, Intermediate Practices in Jean Yu Cheng's Blossoms and its Adaptations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming today. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Tamara and Dr. Nagib to invite me here. It is my great honor to be part of this workshop. And Tamara has been seeing through this entire project since last year when we first talked about this. So thank you very much. So my talk today is part of, as just mentioned, is part of my book project on language and soundscape, especially in relation to Shanghai dialect literature. And before delving into this topic, I want to play an audio clip of the opening monologue of the Pingtan adaptation of this work I'm going to talk about.
肚上骨头最好是压落地，阿飞正最接力，梁朝伟奇梦无英勇安老，提到下头收钞票，手轻易的放进西装袋袋，再手一的拿出一副扑克牌。 你看细看，再摸出一副，接下来梳头、三七分头，对镜子梳洗，细声别听，骨子里收埋，最后关灯，否极泰来。这个半分钟是上海味道。
This very short passage describing the ending scene of Wong Kar-wai's Days of Being Wild, 阿飞正传, is taken from the beginning of Jin Yucheng's novel 繁花 or Blossoms in English translation. In the Suzhou chant fable, or also known as Pingtan performance, it is read in Shanghainese dialect by the famous Pingtan performer Gao Guowen, accompanied by the slow and sentimental Sanxian banjo music in the background. This monologue is particularly interesting because it marks the transition or the journey from the original text in the cyberspace to pages and eventually to the stage. The author of the novel, Jing Yucheng, claimed Suzhou Pingtan as one of the many sources of inspiration for him. When I was writing, said Jing, I can constantly hear the music and the voice of the Pingtan storyteller in my mind. 5 years after its publication, Blossoms has been adapted into Pingtan, the medium of oral performance that inspired the work in its inception. In 2011, Jing Yucheng started posting short passages on the predominantly Shanghai dialect speakers online forum longtang.org. In 2012, Harvest invited Jing to revise and publish the story in its fall and winter issue. The following year, Jing expanded the story into a one-volume novel published by Shanghai Literature and Art Publishing House. Since then, the novel has won many prestigious literary awards in China and abroad, including the Maozun Literature Prize in 2015. Translations of the book into English and French are also in progress. Since the publication of Blossoms, adaptations of the book have been made in all types of media. Wang Kawai has purchased the copyright of Blossoms. The first season of Pingtan performance was launched in December 2016 in Shanghai. As the first official adaptation of Blossoms, the Pingtan performance led by Gao Bowen began the trend of collective nostalgia for old Shanghai, particularly the 1960s through 1990s Shanghai. As the promotion strategy goes on, right before I left Hong Kong, the Shanghai Pingtan troupe actually performed an abbreviated version of Blossoms at the recently built Tea House Theater inside the West Kowloon Xiju Center. Following this trend, the drama version of Blossoms, directed by Ma Junfeng, premiered in January 2018 at Majestic Theater in downtown Shanghai. Tickets were sold out way ahead of time, leaving scalpers wandering outside the theater in heavy snow. Inside the theater, however, audience were welcomed with a small pack of candies, White Rabbit creamy candies, and prune candies popular in the 1980s and 1990s Shanghai, as part of the whole atmosphere of Shanghai nostalgia. Other adaptations of Blossoms also include comic book and radio broadcast series. Another very important form of adaptation is the illustrations of Blossoms. The illustrations of scenes from the story and maps drawn by the author himself appeared in the novel when it was first published. A self-taught illustrationist, Jing not only successfully supplemented the narratives of Blossoms through the visual medium, but also established his own painting style. After Blossoms gained fame in the Chinese intellectual circle, Jing also started painting hundreds of illustrations related to the space and history of Shanghai. His first personal exhibition, titled Disappearance and Departure, was held in Duoyunxuan Art Gallery and also Shanghai Municipal Library in 2017, and in nearby cities in the Yangtze River Delta. These illustrations can be categorized as the spin-off from the original novel. In many ways, Jing Yucheng's Blossoms follow the typical practice of transmedia adaptation of Chinese internet literature. In the new millennium, online forums such as Qidian Zhongwenwang and Jinjiang Wenxuecheng, with billions of users in China and abroad, became the most important source of TV and film adaptations. An author usually begins online serialization in one of these websites, gains popularity, and sells the intellectual property for TV and film adaptations. With the release of the adaptations, the story is again printed and promoted together with its adaptation. Despite the popularity of the new generation cultural entrepreneurs such as Han Han, Guo Jingming, and the huge profit generated by the so-called IP industry, Chinese internet literature receives criticism from literary critics regarding the relatively low quality of the majority of online serialization. Many authors prioritize action and plot design over literary skills, logic, and internal consistency due to the business model of IP industry and the fast speed of installment serialization expected by the netizens. Nevertheless, as the base of Chinese literature gradually takes on this digital turn, Internet literature has also challenged the definition of literature and altered the traditional practice of writing. For example, the famous overseas Chinese writer Yan Geling, her novella Fanghua was written upon the request of the fifth-generation filmmaker Feng Xiaogang for the purpose of adaptation alone. In the past, however, most of her works have gained fame among her readers before it was being made into a film. Recent literary practices becomes more inherently intermedial and transmedial from the very moment of its inception. While Jing Yucheng's Blossoms basically follows the IP adaptation model of internet literature, its artistic achievements made many literary critics and fans frown upon when hearing the label of internet literature given to it. Jing himself also criticized IP novels for their deliberate purpose of commercialization at the cost of flattening characters and linearizing plot. However, online serialization is indispensable to Jing Yucheng's transmedia practice. In the following part, I will approach the issue of intermediality in Jing's novel from three angles. First, the online forum. Second, the emphasis on the sound and script. And third, the visual turn of spatialization in his work. In each aspect, successfully incorporating intermediality allows Jing to capitalize on and stretch beyond the IP adaptation model. First of all, the online forum allowed an interactive type of storytelling. According to the author, there were between 20 to 30 readers who regularly commented on the thread during its initial serialization online. They made requests to the author to write more about a particular district of Shanghai or to expand on specific historical periods they are interested in. Jing would then tailor the story to cater to the requests of his readers. The daily posts continued for over 6 months, and the richness of the text, the flexibility of the storytelling, also are enabled by the establishment of the storyteller as an omniscient narrator, who sets out to tell stories of Shanghai rather than tell stories of a certain fixed set of protagonists. As we know, oral storytelling traditions are rooted in classical Chinese literature and culture. In Blossoms, oral tradition in the Wu dialect culture forms the base narrative of the online serialization. The online forum functioned as a stage for traditional oral performance and installment publishing during the late Qing period. Traditional oral performance includes storytelling and ballad singing on stage. Suzhou Pinghua and Tanzi, collectively known as Suzhou Pingtan, remain popular as genres of folk culture in Shanghai. The storyteller narrates a segment of the story to the audience from a third-person perspective in the performance and acts out various characters by uttering their lines with different gestures, tones, voices. It is important to adjust the flow of the story according to the audience response each time the story is reenacted. Another prominent performative genre in Shanghai is stand-up comedy. Traditional stand-up comedy, known as huajixi, includes single-actor performance called 独角戏 and double-actor performance similar to crosstalk, 相声. The performance in dialect enables the actors to draw on lives of local people as sources of humor, farce, satire, and practical jokes. Gauging the reaction from the audience, the actor on the stage control the content and the way they tell jokes. Using the internet forum as the stage for the storytelling tradition, the author draws readers' attention to the orality of the story. The loose structure of the storyline, flexibility and spreadability of this form of storytelling also allows its various adaptations to draw on different parts of the story without sacrificing the plot as a whole. Second, sound and script lie in the center of Jing's narrative. In the online serialization and the printed book, the choice of languages reflects the author's understanding of and engagement with both online participatory culture and print media. This strategy resolves the challenges to traditional print media regarding dialect. Jing employed colloquial expressions and transliterations of terms in dialect that appears in literary works or were shared in online communities. He also created his own way of transliterating uncommon Shanghainese phrases through Mandarin pronunciation of the Chinese characters. In order to fully understand the meaning of each phrase, readers have to rely on the pronunciation of Mandarin in addition to their knowledge of Shanghainese. The bilingual prerequisite further narrows down the potential readership, forging a very exclusive online community that is able to read and respond in a similar coded language. The emphasis on transliteration and the phonetic aspect of written Chinese among netizens is particularly successful in facilitating a new narrative voice. Online readers not only recognize common expressions of Shanghainese shared in dialect literature and online community, but also understand the author's rules in creating new phrases through transliteration, turning the reading process into an acoustic experience, one that involves sounding out the words from the screen and figuring out the exact meaning based on the sound. Similarly, it is through this interactive practice that Jing Yucheng gradually found his own rhythm and tempo in writing blossoms. However, once the online serialization migrated to the print media, the author did not simply reproduce the past online practice. A major shift from the online edition to the book version is a series of changes from the sound-based usage of written Chinese into a written language that is highly influenced by grammar and syntax of Shanghainese, tailored for readers without any knowledge of Shanghainese. The book version keeps the basic narrative style and sentence structure. Jing replaced many personal pronouns, question particles, and prepositions with those in vernacular Chinese that are more familiar to a general audience of Mandarin background. However, he kept certain verbs and nouns in Shanghainese that are less frequently used in vernacular Chinese. He also replaced many previously transliterated terms with homonyms that have connotations closer to their own meaning in Shanghainese. Along with the shift from sound-based writing to grammar and sentence structure, the narrator also draws readers' attention to the languages spoken by the characters in the book version. For instance, as you can see on the screen, in many conversations during the dinner banquets, the narrator would meticulously record the languages of each character. In addition to conversations in Shanghainese, Jing also points out Northern language, Taiwanese Mandarin, Subei language, accented Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, and so on. While readers cannot hear Shanghainese by reading the book version aloud, as they did with the online version, nevertheless, they can imagine the polyphonic conversations through verbal description in the book. This change demonstrates the author's attempt to address a wider Sinophone reader who lacked knowledge of Shanghainese. The online serialization prepared the author for developing a narrative voice that is based on Shanghainese pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, and syntax. Without this early exercise, Jing would not have been able to carry out his literary experiment in a 400-page novel. Meanwhile, the cross-media adaptation opens the possibility of representing voices that are not just in original language, providing a model for writing in dialect in contemporary Chinese literature. With particular attention to language and sound, the story itself is a text that demands readers to read out loud and at the same time is impossible to be read without code switching and code mixing. This peculiar nature allows multimedia adaptation to come in and reenact these dialects, accents, and languages creatively and vibrantly on stage. Many jokes during the performance of Ping Tan came directly from dialect-related comedic effects. Third, the illustration and maps inserted in the narrative restore and enrich the spatial imagination of the old Shanghai and served potentially as the site map for visual adaptations. Jing's obsession with map-making forms another documentation of the city's mobility and changes over time. Following the precedence of the Xinxiang Girls of Shanghai, written by Han Bangqing, in which real street names were provided in the storytelling to sustain the reliability of the fictional narrative to the reader, Jing maps his fictional characters onto the historical map of Shanghai from the 1960s to 2000s. The neat street layout with names of streets listed in handwriting is complicated by the word bubbles. So these are the word bubbles. They highlight the old architectures that no longer exist in the new millennium. Moreover, the name of the district, Luan District, is also a historical name no longer in use since 2011 due to the new administrative division in Shanghai. Myriads of historical architectures and former residences of celebrities are located here, Xu Zhimo, Mei Lanfang, Ba Jing, Zhou Enlai, to name just a few. Similarly, in a map drawn upon Wang Kawai's request in preparation for the film adaptation, Jing sketched the disappeared streets and buildings from Shanghai. The maps serve as historical documentation of the city, materializing the past for readers who had experience in those places. Another very important scene in the Cultural Revolution storyline of the novel shows Shu Hua, a character, and Hu Sheng, the protagonist, walking past a church in downtown Shanghai, where construction workers demolished the church and built a 9-meter-high statue of Mao. Alluding to the ongoing Cultural Revolution in 1967, this scene lays out the impact of history on the cityscape, showing people in a collective frenzy at the moment. In the reform and opening up storyline, much later in the narrative, readers are told that in the same area, the new Jinjiang Hotel was built in 2000 in the same location. Read together with the above-mentioned scene, a sense of history emerges. The city becomes a palimpsest, bearing witness to the shifts of historical trajectories going back and forth, left and right on the spectrum of ideology. What the illustration here does in a story is to highlight the sense of history. The illustration, consisting of the street corner in 3 moments, 1963, 1967, and 2000, appears together with the above passages, allowing readers to jump ahead of time and view the described scene in a broader historical overview. Rather than indulging in the very moment of the Cultural Revolution, the illustration disrupts or fast-forwards the narrative and reminds the readers to reflect on and question the linear narrative of history writing in general. Having examined the intermediality of blossoms from 3 aspects, we have a picture of Jing Yucheng's effort to incorporate the interactive online medium, oral storytelling, visual aesthetics in traditional print culture. The online forum provides the author with a space to develop a narrative voice that is influenced by dialect literature and culture in Shanghainese and oral storytelling tradition in classical Chinese. In the book edition, Jing revised the narrative to make it accessible to readers without the knowledge of original language, while preserving the references to these cultural traditions. The map and illustrations further conflate time and space, disrupting the linear progressive narrative and negotiating the sense of history with the readers. Going back to the criticism of Chinese internet literature, the case of Blossoms demonstrates the power of internet forums to incorporate intermediality, formerly restricted by the print media. However, we should also bear in mind the uniqueness of Blossoms. The author works for an established literary magazine for over 30 years and have access to the top resources in the literary arena. Although the readership is not small, it is still a niche market incomparable to the most popular online IPs. The hierarchy between serious literature and popular literature, highbrow and lowbrow division is still there in the promotion and adaptation of this work. Furthermore, the issue of censorship looms large during the transmedia adaptation of the work. The forum Jing initially serialized the story has shut down the commenting function and deleted contents deemed inappropriate for readers. The drama version avoids sensitive passages about the Cultural Revolution, while the Pingtan version chooses excerpts of happy memories rather than the sad memories, leaving out the nihilistic ending of the novel. This reminds us of the obstacles and limitations of transmedia practices and the uneven distribution of power and surveillance across mediums and time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Yunwen. I'm utterly impressed with the timekeeping of our speakers today, and what a fascinating talk yet again. We will have plenty of subjects to discuss after the panel. In the meantime, I would like to introduce our dear Tamara, who teaches here at in the Department of Film, Theatre and Television on practical and theoretical subjects in film. Her research interests include Chinese independent cinema, documentary film, migration, memory, and marginalized representations on screen. She's currently working on turning her PhD thesis, Contemporary Chinese Independent Cinema, Urban Spaces, Mobility and Memory, into a monograph. Okay, and today she's going to be talking about, let me give you the exact title, Videographic Illuminations, Archiving Memory in Chinese Independent Cinema.
Specifically in Though I Am Gone. That's too long of a title.
Yeah.
Okay, so nonfiction storytelling is one of the most exciting and boundary-pushing practices in cinema. It's no longer limited to being understood through an analysis of its content. Instead, how a nonfiction story is told brings about many opportunities for discussion and dialogue between academics and those perhaps directly impacted by this information. Contemporary documentary filmmakers are approaching difficult historical events in inventive ways. For example, in the 2012 documentary film The Act of Killing, directors Joshua Oppenheimer and Christine Sin turn the documentary techniques of recreations into a political statement, enlisting not actors but actual participants in the Indonesian killings of 1965-66. The documentary film has also proved its legitimacy on web-based platforms, one case in point being this virtual reality film about an actual food bank crisis in Los Angeles. When documentary films meet animation, they can imagine poetic ways to explore the representation of conflict and trauma. This includes Ari Folman's personal encounters as a soldier in the Lebanese War, realized in the stylistically noir animated documentary film Waltz with Bashir. Today, I would like to discuss a Chinese independent documentary film called Though I Am Gone, and which was produced in 2006 by filmmaker Hu Jie. Independent cinema in China emerged in the late 80s and early 90s with the help of our very own esteemed guest here, filmmaker Wu Guang. And since then, the arrival of increasingly more affordable, more accessible, and more portable digital video technology has radically reshaped possibilities in both independent and documentary cinema. Similar to the films I've already mentioned, Though I Am Gone deals with a sensitive topic regarding historical memory, and both what and how the story is told will be my focus. My aim will be to show you how he uses intermedial forms as a strategy for unearthing spatial and temporal tensions embedded in the representation of China's Cultural Revolution, which occurred from the years 1966 to 1976. However, I would like to present my findings by showing you a videographic essay I have created for this occasion. I just want to apologize for my voiceover narration ahead of time. I had thought of asking someone else to do it for me because I was afraid of having my own voice in a voiceover video essay, but I went for it. So apologies. Anyways, you'll hear my voice a lot. Okay. While digital video technology has opened up opportunities for amateur filmmakers to explore their own realities, it has also helped revitalize how film scholars express their opinions about these films. So after watching the video, I will then discuss some of the illuminations and challenges I had in creating this videographic essay and understanding the filmmaker's aesthetic strategies to address cultural memory.
We need to, before you start, can you stop?
I'll turn the lights off?
Yeah, let's
I'll do that.
Thanks, Tamara. And just a second, it seems that the curtains are covering part of the... Yeah, I think there is a button to do that, but if you can do that, just open a bit more.
The old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Is this one okay?
Yeah, just a bit more of that too.
That's good.
Thank you.
Hu Jie's 2006 documentary film Though I Am Gone is set in present-day Beijing. However, very little of it is shot in public or focuses on the present. Instead, much of the film consists of testimonies, legal documents, personal letters, newsreel footage, and personal photographs related to one man's attempts to find justice for his wife Bian, who was murdered by her students during the youth-led Red Guard movement in 1966. Like many documentary films that deal with memory, this one elderly man's story is part of a wider cultural context. Although the filmmaker rarely speaks from behind the camera, when he intervenes with his off-screen presence or through aesthetic devices, they are always at the service of Wang, his central subject.
当时拿着这个照相机去拍卞老师的遗体，那我觉得是要有巨大的那种精神上的疼痛的。
那当然是，这个目的很明确。我要把历史真相记录下来。
Rather than concerning himself with a dogmatic truth and objectivity surrounding the topic of difficult national memories, the filmmaker insists on a persistence of subjectivity through poetic visual forms and patterns. After all, the evidence belongs to Wang's personal archive. So what tools and methods does the documentarist apply to illuminate the spectator on the unofficial, official, private, public gaps in Chinese cultural memory? Let's talk structure. Here, the film opens with a close-up shot of a pendulum swinging on a clock. This is followed by a black and white shot of an old 35mm photographic camera facing forward and held in Wang's hands. Wang is a retired photojournalist who felt compelled to document the violent events leading up to his wife's death, her body at the time of her death, and the family coping after her death. In effect, these personal photographs are inextricably intertwined with the public experience during the Cultural Revolution. A lens flips out of its case before the hands holding the device snaps a photo. The film's title appears across a white screen. This is followed by a shot of the elderly man Wang, who stands alone in his apartment adjusting his blinds. For a moment, he turns his head towards the camera. The camera's face appears again, clicks, and reveals a black and white photograph depicting the upper torso of Bian's body in the crematorium at the time of her death. We return to a facial close-up of Wang, now staring off in silence. Each pattern starts with the camera's face. It clicks and presents personal photographic evidence, which is followed by public newsreel footage and present-day testimony by Wang and other witnesses. The circular narrative structure shifts from personal to public memory, from photographs and newsreel archives to present-day testimony. The filmmaker further intervenes through editing by using color and monochrome. The notion of time is central to the narrative and presents itself throughout with the repeated sound of a ticking clock. Hujia may be responsible for assembling images and sound, but only if it emphasizes the subjective qualities of experience for Wang and his family. He records personal testimony, documents Wang's findings, and brings this forensic evidence from the private dwelling to a public space of knowledge. The editing structure also sensitizes the viewer to a spatialized understanding of historical memory. Here, the camera follows Wang as he enters through the archway of his family's old apartment building.
6月23号，学生这个在元所的带领之下，100多学生包围住宅，跑到我们家里进行调查，收集无限的材料。铁打日报支持的，这就是他的形式，他是书行形式贴在这里。
当时就是一直在家里，
一直。
当时拍这个照片的时候是从哪个角度拍的？
我去这楼梯上。
哦，在楼梯上。
这楼梯往上拍，因为这儿距离太少，往上拍。家里也好，外面也好，里面也好，不是。
By juxtaposing these two images through montage and a camera tilt, the filmmaker evokes both trauma and the excavation of amnesiac space. Through the mediums of digital video and photography, he promotes a disturbance and creates a time in between for both past and present temporalities. Film studies have analyzed the work of film archives mostly from the perspective of preservation, restoration, and digitization.
成群结队的到一个批判对象家里面，翻箱倒柜，什么都抄，更厉害的就是连地板都撬。
Here, public archival footage is reclaimed by the individual and remediated into the documentary film, allowing for spatial and temporal access into Wang's memory of his own apartment raid. Like the elliptical narrative structure, here Hu's editing strategy gives agency to his subject.
屋顶呢，房顶呢都揭开，就是那个老式的房子，顶棚啊，也很好破坏的，给它破坏了，到处是烧掉。这个，然后就把东西就往外扔，可以炸碎的东西啊炸，能烧的就烧。像我们我们院子里面就是这个水果园里研究人员嘛，书啊就往外扔烧，就当在院子里面就开始烧，就这样情况。
The remediation of the National Archive showing the Red Guard raids in 1966 promotes an opportunity for it to be freed from the act of national forgetting. At the same time, Wang proves his family's dedication to the communist cause. From a 1944 photo exhibition he organized in celebration of the anti-fascist war against the KMT Nationalist Party.
大黄火就是用大西洋线上面的，但是原是罗斯福的话是吧？启动舆论要有各种自由，要有免于恐惧的自由。
To Communist Party documents that were found in Bian's school bag. Now, in an effort to create a more realistic account of the everyday, there are scenes included in the film that capture the unexpected moments that arise from shooting on location. This is known as xianchang. For example, most of the film depicts Wang's unwavering dedication to find justice for his wife, forensically investigating the moments that led to her untimely death. However, one scene stands apart from the rest. After swallowing his medication, Wang sits in the kitchen alone. All of a sudden, a woman saunters in with a bowl of rice and places it next to Wang. The camera cuts into an extreme facial close-up. At first, this new information jars with the Wang we have grown to know.
我们很重要的一句话，我就跟他说：“我说我有这样的事情，我要做这样的事情，我是希望你能够支持。” 他同意了，有这个前提，我们才结婚。
伯母已经和你生活了多长时间
？30多年了。
However, by including this scene in the final cut, further attests to the filmmaker's persistence of subjectivity, and the spirit of xianchang remains intact.
这个他对我几个孩子。 不是亲生，胜似亲生，感情非常非常的好。
So I would like to be the first to admit that there are certain areas of the videographic essay which still require some fine-tuning and expansion. And so if you have any suggestions or questions, please feel free to ask me or speak to me at any point today. I welcome your suggestions. You're the audience after all. Now, I would like to discuss how the videographic essay helps me to highlight the filmmaker's aesthetic strategies and then investigate the uses of the intermedial and remediated forms in the film in the context of cultural memory. In defense of DVD technology, Laura Mulvey emphasizes how the ability to freeze or hold an image at any given point in a film provides an opportunity to break down and reveal unexpected meanings of a sequence. She goes on to say that in film theory and criticism, this delay is the essential process of textual analysis. In her optimistic stance, Mulvey concludes that the advent of DVD technology has helped to revitalize our ability to engage with the form in a critical manner without having to rely solely on writing or our memory for delivering our understanding of film sequence. Although Mulvey was not explicitly making an argument for the videographic essay, she was indeed saying what critics and filmmakers have been saying since the days of Cahiers du Cinéma, that we have the ability to work with images as a writing tool to understand the meanings behind film sequences and structures. For my own videographic essay, it was essential for me to understand, first, how to communicate context to the audience, with a broader audience in mind who may be unfamiliar with the historical events that shaped the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I felt that the need to try and articulate this by introducing the main subject, Wang Jingyao, and his fight for the injustice of his late wife, Bian, was pivotal. Despite the film's ability to capture witness testimony from numerous people, that is one area that I left out of this film. I felt that introducing them into my visual analysis might take the focus away from the filmmaker's strategy to position his camera at the service of Wang, his central subject. In this documentary, Wang has collected stacks of evidentiary material that proved his wife's untimely death deserved to be part of a collective memory. And so there was also a lot of material for me to unpack and select for my own audience. In effect, I felt this editing process in a way drew me closer to the filmmaker's process when sifting through Wang's archival material regarding his professional career as a photojournalist, his personal life as a father and husband, and then widow during the Cultural Revolution. Beyond the physical evidence, much of the witness testimony is recorded in domestic spaces, and only twice returns to actual locations from the past that serves to illuminate our understanding of the circumstances that led to her death at the hands of her own students in August of 1966. Since much of the film relies on Wang's personal stories and archive, the filmmaker employs an elliptical structure, constantly returning to Wang's camera throughout the film, capturing evidence during this tumultuous event, including the deeply effective photographs of Bian at the time of her death. The camera, its repetitive click, and the photo of Bian's dead body in a crematorium helps to transform Wang, who has now become a widow and a photojournalist. His compelling record of that moment shifts from the non-intervening objective eye of a photojournalist into a pure intervention because it's both political and personal. By showing the construction of the elliptical structure and heightened sounds, I was able to distinguish the historical information from the psychological trauma of returning to the same event over and over 40 years later. Wang is shot almost entirely indoors and in the shade here for the opening sequence. And the filmmaker shifts from monochrome to color, never quite stabilizing an evolving structure apart from repetition in the film. When Wang returns to his former family residence, the filmmaker creates juxtapositions between the personal stilled image and the public digital video image, making sure to emphasize these associations through the use of the camera tilt. By employing montage as an editing strategy, the present-day vacant apartment space merges with the photograph and reveals a silent erasure of cultural memory. In his attempt to merge past and present, Hughes promotes a spatial and temporal disturbance. In my analysis, I further highlighted this juxtaposition using a split-screen aesthetic to evaluate the filmmaker's digital video reconstruction of memory through testimony, place, and still photographs. The freeze frame also became an essential tool for my own textual analysis of the film. Here, Hu works with collective memory by interspersing Wang's testimony with the public archive. These visual archives of Mao Zedong and the Red Guard movement during the Cultural Revolution are inscribed in their early positioning as a collective, energetic ideology. Here, though, Hujia's insertion of Wang's voiceover overlaps with the public archive and enlivens a discursive context of remediation. It suggests an alternative use for the visual archive and provides agency for his subject. In this contemporary context, the remediation of images helps to produce new layers of meanings for both personal and collective memory. Now, not only do images from the public archive create new layers of meaning in Hujia's film, the personal archive also inhabits a discursive space. For instance, Wang is shown throughout the film to be a dedicated widow, painstakingly shaping the viewer's understanding of all the events circulating around his wife's death and the suffering he continues to have endured since that time. The oral and visual repetition throughout the film and the constant temporal juxtapositions between images depicting the past and present illustrate his personal engagement with his late wife's death and his inability to accept it or adequately be able to mourn it. However, the filmmaker complicates these aesthetic registers when 3/4 into the film, as I showed you, he includes footage of Wang's current wife entering the kitchen all of a sudden to place food in front of him. It's revealed that they've been married for 30 years. Here, this scene may be in excess to the film's central objective. However, the inclusion of this information promotes a more complex and realistic understanding of the man, Wang, of his personal memory and of his personal archive. Despite the filmmaker's deliberate intervention here, I would argue that he is trying to preserve the essence of shooting on location, where the everyday reality does often interrupt the documentarian story. He's reflecting a time in the now, otherwise known as xianchang in Chinese independent cinema. Beyond the scope of today's presentation and my current videographic essay, there are other layers which add effective intermedial dimensions to this film, to which I would like to expand on in my videographic essay. This includes how Wang and his family have the way they've memorialized her death through family photos, a sort of a ritual where they have her portrait next to them in a concealed bookcase. And Wang's continued fascination and identification with Christian iconography, which the filmmaker highlights throughout the film. And I think there was just one clip where it showed a church being torn down in this videographic essay, which I didn't speak about, but which I will be expanding on later on. In addition to Hujia's decision-making strategies for the production of a complex and engaging documentary film, I've had my own questions regarding the process of videographic criticism. For instance, how does one make a video essay from a film that in turn re-edits and re-elaborates media archive materials of an epic making event? Also, how to re-edit a film then that's already edited from archival footage without falling into a sort of derive of quotations. My video essay takes on the more classic argumentative form of an essay. A voiceover analyzes the main historical and political topics and the public-private experience of it, while the images constitute a visual reference. And it also seeks to find a way to deconstruct the documentarian's position in documenting a personal or public story. And so even if it doesn't fully explore the potential of video essays in terms of creating maybe a poetic video essay, I believe it offers an aesthetic and intermedial interpretation of the movie. It reflects in a way on that's what I'm doing right now, on the way it re-edits and reassembles images in relation to historical testimony. And it presents new material to the videographic archive that is already existing out there, highlighting how Chinese independent documentary cinema not only investigates, but also experiments with historical content. Thank you.
Well, that was really great. Intermediality has now migrated to the very act of presenting. So I would like to invite speakers, the three speakers, to that cozy corner there at the front, and turn the light slightly up so we can take questions from the audience. I'll take this step. Sure. Yeah, thank you. So we had an array of immensely enjoyable and thought-provoking presentations. We started with Rong talking about the four perfections and how poetry, painting, calligraphy and the seal interact within the Chinese tradition. We then moved on to adaptations on the most varied levels of a literary piece, including sound, including online platforms, so again a very rich approach. And then Tamara brought us back to Huge's Gone, including memory and photography within the film, which is that conversation between the two mediums. But also her own presentation was a videographic essay that she then self-reflectively commented on to explain why she had done that. So many layers of intermediality and interarts dialogue that could take a whole day for us to unpack. But and I have obviously my own questions, but I'll first start with offers from the audience, if they have any questions. I would like to ask Professor O to start with about the four perfections and then the four jewels. So the four perfections are the arts themselves, and the jewels are the tools that they use to make those perfections. And they seem to be interacting. For example, the first engraving that you showed, the lady is in a very unstable position. She's on a slope and kind of not very steady. And then the poetry and the seal seem to offer some balance to her on the page, on the rectangular format of the painting itself. So I was curious about that very unusual situation, because the subject is normally put on a flat floor, a horizontal and stable, and on that one it was a slope, a mountain, and there was that situation. But then the way you described the poem and the seals opposed on the bottom to complete where the line of the poetry had finished, rightly, not exactly in line with the other one. So the seal is opposed there to complete the picture and gives symmetry to that. So, but I wonder whether how we should be reading the conception of that female figure itself, which is in that kind of moving from one season to the other, moving from the summer to the autumn, where she doesn't need the fan anymore. So is she moving to old age and leaving behind her beauty and attraction to something, or towards death even?
Not death, just so that with the title of the painting, a lady band holding a fan. There's a historical anecdote. A lady band was a true figure in history. She was once favored by emperor, but later on she lost the favor. And then she wrote a poem, and the title of the poem is about the autumn fan. So later on, whenever in the Chinese poetry or Chinese literature, when a poet or writer refers to autumn fan, it refers to the twist and turn of the life, or one's life. And Tang Ying, the painter, actually made use this figure also refer to himself. He was very talented, but he lost political favor in the examination. And then he just disillusioned and get related to prostitutes and became a professional artist. But you know, in China, Confucianism was still very influential in the long history of China, the most important thing for most of Chinese men were still to be officials. Only when you lost the promising career officially, then you devoted yourself to the art. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. So the autumn fan is an oxymoron, isn't it? Because you don't need a fan in the autumn anymore.
Yeah. You just make use of it. It's very popular in summer, but later on in autumn, the fan is put aside.
Yeah.
So it's compared to be the changeable life.
Yeah. Wonderful, fascinating. Great. I wonder whether, yes, please.
Hi, Tamara. Thanks for the interesting video essay. I'm interested in the style and format that you have adopted in writing your video essay. You have used a very objective approach, talking about a very, a subjective film. So obviously you are very much touched by this film, but you haven't actually disclose your subject from position. I was wondering what was your consideration.
Well, then that would be maybe too much subjectivity in the film. No, I think that after I actually watched a lot of videographic essays and then sort of worked out how I wanted to see this film shown and how I wanted to approach that mode, that method. So it was never going to be a question of whether I was going to show my subjective. It's not about my taste or obviously if I'm already speaking about the film, then it's an interest of mine already. But yeah, I think that it was always going to be a very objective viewpoint in looking at the structures and patterns of how the film is constructed and how it uses intermediality. I hope that it doesn't take away from the sort of the emotions and the reality of this person's history. Perhaps I think there's some things I need to work out in terms of timings. So it felt slightly rushed for me, and I'd probably like to expand more on some of these areas, like the persistence of subjectivity. Maybe give it more space to breathe, less of my voice, more of the film, maybe. But yeah, that is an interesting question. I don't think I ever questioned though the objectivity of my voice or my perspective.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question for Tamara. Okay. Just as you say, the internet could be a good place for communicate these clips of these memories. And did you really think about the internet could be a good place for the Chinese independent films, for their surviving, for struggling? Because in China today, we have some, probably we have lots of independent films, but we really have small panel for these films to survive, to let people know. Whatever Beijing or Nanjing, we had independent film festival, but now they are really under some levels. So the internet. Do you really think the internet could be a good place for these films?
Well, I mean, it's not really for me to say. I think that's something that maybe our filmmakers might be able to speak a little bit more about, how you archive your own films, your independent films.
Yeah, we just have a new idea, a new story, just last week.
Oh yeah.
The company organized the film screening online. From the Shenzhen. So they invited the curator to make a program for the first screening. 5 films from the 5 films. So I was one of them. So the company contacted me to ask me to which film I would like. But the curator that chose the one film is we're screening after investigating my father. This is my latest film. I said I'm okay. Of course, I'm glad to you like to screening this film, but this film is maybe part of the sensitive for the maybe making a problem for you. So for me, it's okay. But I want to start the program just the first time. So I suggest them to screen my last film, the treatment. Yeah. Also, some part is sensitive about cultural revolution, but I think it's good for the film, investigative film. It's about it's very sensitive things from the June 4, Tiananmen Square. So the part of that is my story from this event. My last film is the treatment. So that's okay. So just had a screening I think the 24. Yeah, 24. 24 was first screening. So they contact that make the program for the how many 10 days screening on the land. So people can watch the movie from everywhere. They just the booking they call it the cinema on land. So they just to book the ticket. I don't know how much, maybe 10 or 20. So the film, the screening, for example, 3 times on the afternoon, each day. So 10 days screening. It's a very new thing. Maybe you can respond to your questions in Chinese. It's very smart to know how to run the film, even without any lessons. Maybe the government to watch this. Okay, it's not good. They stop this screening, and then next thing is happening. So Chinese is they know how to survive any condition.
Yeah. Brilliant. Basically, because my research, academic research, is basically on the online films. So for the internet platforms, most of them are commercial films. They don't care about independent films. We use the internet platforms. We really have a small, chance to let the people know the independent films. But that's really a good chance, good new way.
Yeah, so it's a fantastic strategy, which is a very subversive, I would say, strategy of having your film seen by other people, even when there are other forces that are trying to block it. So thanks very much for this contribution. I would like to ask a question to Yunwen regarding Blossoms. I would be very keen to read it. I haven't read it, but you said that the English and French translations are still ongoing, so that there is no available translation in English yet. So I was, all the time you were presenting your paper, I was asking me what is actually Blossoms about, because I'm not familiar with the story. But I saw that several of the pictures you showed includes a band of people with instruments, with musical instruments, and I was wondering what the role of music is in the story of Blossoms.
Thank you very much for the question. So, because I originally wrote an article about it, so I didn't spend too much time explaining the plot. But the story is actually a very expansive narrative about Shanghai. It focuses on 3 young men who were born in the 1950s. So the story has 2 parallel timelines. One is following their childhood in 1960s, and the other is following their adulthood in 1980s and 1990s. So these 2 storylines are appearing interchangeably in one chapter is focusing on the 1960s, the second chapter will switch to the 1990s. But most of them are about their life stories, how they went through the process of Cultural Revolution, and how it influences their decisions in their later part of their life. So this is basically the plot. But the most interesting thing about Blossoms is that plot is not that important. The most important part is the storytelling itself. The narrator is really interesting, engages the readers with all kinds of stories. Some are like stories overheard by these protagonists from other people, which joins into this narrative to form a more panoramic view of Shanghai. And that's why the photos I've shown is the Pingtan music adaptation of the novel. They only have 4 segments, 4 nights of performance in Hong Kong. The original version performed in Shanghai has 7 days. Each day will have like 1 hour and 40 minutes performance, but it cannot cover the entirety of the story. It's too long. So they are choosing episodes from the original story and turns it into a Pingtan performance. The reason why it's Pingtan specifically is because the author mentioned that he was inspired by Pingtan. He himself has a family ancestry from Suzhou area, and also he includes a lot of lyrics from Suzhou Pingtan in his original writing. That gives a lot of space for the actual performers to make adaptations.
Yeah. Fascinating. And so there is this important historical aspect that is very closely connected with the geography of Shanghai, that is represented through cartography, mapping. And those maps that you showed are also fascinating because they also change across history. And I was fascinated by that changing of the church into a statue of Mao, and after that by a restaurant hotel. So it changes very radically from religion through politics and then commercialism, capitalism at the end. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, because the style of the mapping also changes quite radically, from no color to a lot of color, from a lot of writing to very little writing. So could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So originally the author inserted about 10 illustrations into the print version. All the ones that are in monochrome are the original ones from the book, and then the colored ones are specifically made for exhibitions. Yeah, so that also has a commercial purpose to draw attention of the viewers.
And then you were closer to the cartoon form with the bubbles and so on, whereas the first one, the inscriptions are inside the streets and so on to give the names of the places. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, he's also in charge. He's the editor of Shanghai Literature, Shanghai Wenxue. So he was also in charge of the series of Shanghai 城市地图 city map. So that in that series, he follows the development of Shanghai through sketches of the city. So that is also one of the inspirations for him.
Wonderful, fascinating. I wonder if the audience would have any more questions. And if not, I would just like to call your attention to the fact that we have a plan to publish the proceedings of this event. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but it's very important that the participants start thinking about producing publishable versions of their papers, because it's going to be very important. And the second announcement that I forgot to mention is that we are going to have a follow-up of this event. That's the plan, in Hangzhou Normal University around the same period in a year's time. So we do hope to be able in due course to launch an invitation for you to attend the event back in China. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.